So I'm Katherine Edmonds, and I'm kind of coming here from my past life. So I used to work for Georgia River Network and kind of was hired to start the Water Trails program, which has been taken over by Gwyneth and is up and running. And so I'm now working for American Rivers and doing kind of land conservation. So not really working on water trails, although where I work is on the Etowah, and they are working on a water trail which helps land conservation. So, and Matt is here, and he's going to talk about that, right, later on today. But American Rivers actually does a lot of Blue Trails work, and I don't know if any of you guys have been to the Blue Trails Guide, the website that American Rivers has, but I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But what I want to talk to you guys about today is some research I did when I was working for Georgia River Network, and I've updated that a little bit recently, just on the economic benefits of Blue Trails. And so everyone here kind of knows what Blue Trails are, but and we're all excited about them because what they can do for our community, we know that they're really important. That they can connect our communities, that they can get people connected to their river. I mean, this is a beautiful setting where you can actually see the river, and there's lots of communities where that's not true. And where I live in Athens, that's not really true, unfortunately. But so the problem is oftentimes that we run into is convincing other people of that, right? We all have a value of the rivers, an intrinsic value that we love being out there, we love paddling. But not everybody has that value, right? And so what we can do to convince people is talk sort of in their language, which is money. And so that's kind of what I want to talk to you today and give you some tools to go back to your communities and use those tools. And so recently the Outdoor Industry Association came out with a report, which maybe many of you have seen, and if you haven't, I would encourage you to go to their website and look at this report. And so this is the report that came out in 2012, and it's really kind of a broad report about the economic benefits of outdoor recreation. And so it's not specifically about paddling, it kind of breaks it down a little bit, but it talks about what outdoor recreation does for the American economy overall. And so outdoor recreation as a group provides 6.1 million American jobs, $646 billion in outdoor recreation spending each year. I mean, that's a lot of money, right? And so you can talk to your community and talk about these numbers, and I'll give you some more specific paddling numbers in a little bit. But so outdoor recreation has a huge impact on the economy. And so this just shows you annual consumer spending in billions compared to other, categories. And so pharmaceuticals is actually below outdoor recreation, which kind of blew my mind, right? Like, that's crazy. But of course, outpatient healthcare is higher. But gasoline is lower, household utilities is lower, motor vehicles and parts is lower. And so this has a huge impact on our economy. And one thing you can talk about, although this is just outdoor recreation, water trails are not necessarily only just paddling, right? We want trails next to our water trails, so people who maybe don't want to go kayaking can also walk there. And so this is bringing more than just paddling. It's really just bringing outdoor recreation to your communities, these water trails. And so it also has impacts beyond just the direct consumer spending, right? It has what we've maybe heard a lot recently, the trickle-down effect, that it has these indirect impacts on the economy. And so this just kind of gives you a pie chart of the impact it has on other economic parts. So you have retail, you have manufacturing, foods and services. So we know that when we have a water trail, we have impacts on lodging, restaurants, outdoor retailers, right? When you bring people in that are paddlers, they're going to spend money on these other aspects of our economy. So what else we know is that paddling is a growing sport. And so I'm going to talk about a few different studies, and I'll give Gwyneth these citations that she can put on the website. But so this Bowker et al. Study that was done in 1999 basically just looked at outdoor recreation projection use in 2050. And so what it looked at was all outdoor recreation, but what it found was that there was going to be this really big, significant increase in canoeing, rafting, kayaking, and non-pool swimming. And so those are all activities that people do on water trails, right? And then another study found in 2003, $20 million was spent on purchasing kayaks and canoes. So that's another boost to the economy, right? That's part of that big chunk of money that's spent, $646 billion. 17.4 million people averaging this. I forgot to put paddling, I think is where it's supposed to be right here between the 10 trips. So of 174 outings a year, 10 of those are paddling trips. And so people are paddling, at a significant number, and they are, that participation is increasing. And so one thing I didn't say that I should have mentioned back with this outdoor recreation study with the Outdoor Industry Association, what they found is that there was a 5% increase in revenues in outdoor recreation basically in the last 6 to 8 years. And so, what's been happening in the last 6 to 8 years, right? We've had the economic downturn, but outdoor recreation is still increasing in their revenues. And so we have this, really growing industry in a time where other things aren't growing. And so we have lots of communities out there that are struggling, and this is something that can help bring them money to their communities. And we know that paddling is increasing. We know that people are doing it at a higher rate. So this is another study done by the Outdoor Industry Association. I think it came out in 2008. And this just looked at basically sort of the demographics of all outdoor recreation. And so I kind of pulled out the paddling sports. So this is kayaking, canoeing, and rafting, basically. And so what it found was basically a 2% increase over the last 2 years, from 2006 to 2008. And so you can see in canoeing is in blue, kayaking is green, and rafting is in red. And so that is all increasing. And kayaking is actually increasing more than canoeing and rafting. So you can see kind of rafting and canoeing kind of stayed the same, whereas kayaking really increased significantly. And one thing that I found really interesting in looking at these studies that I think you can bring back to your communities is the people who are paddling. So this shows your age bracket and your income bracket. And so maybe as you guys have found out, as you get older, you make more money, typically, maybe not. But that's what I'm finding. But so you get into this large chunks of people, and they're 25 to 44 and 45 plus, and they are making more money. So the people who are doing these sports have higher incomes. They are going to spend more money, right? And so you have people that are have expendable incomes that are doing these sports that are coming to your communities. So what about Georgia? So this is kind of hard to see, but so this is a list of participants by state and basically percentage. And so this is overall participation in outdoor recreation. And so Georgia came, I think, in 37th or 38th. And then canoeing, kayaking, and whitewater kayaking. And Georgia is actually fairly high, and particularly in kayaking. And so here I have the numbers. And so in overall participation, Georgia was actually pretty low, but in kayaking and canoeing, Georgia was much higher. And so there's this priority under her recreation in Georgia. So kind of interesting, right? Like, we may not have the overall outdoor recreation, but we have the numbers in kayaking in particular. And so one thing about Georgia also specifically is we have lots of areas that aren't a metropolis, right? We don't have tons of people in these areas. And so how do you get people to visit your communities, your small rural communities? What this study found, Coulier et al. In 2005 looked at basically this income equality between urban areas and rural areas and how you can bridge that gap. How can you, make this economic gap between these urban and rural areas smaller? And what they found was highlighting natural amenities helps lower that income gap. And so what they found especially was river and lake related natural amenities helped make that gap smaller. And what else they found was that lots of rural areas have these sort of, they're mining towns, they're factory towns, they're whatever. They were kind of these single economies. And so in order for a rural economy to really bridge that gap, they have to diversify their economy. And so adding outdoor recreation, adding access to these natural amenities is one way of doing that. And one way that actually they found was pretty successful. And so what they came up with in their conclusion was increasing access to rivers could help diversify rural economies and bridge the economic gap. So that's pointing to water trails, right? Is like they found that having access to rivers helps your rural economy. And so another study that I would encourage you guys to look at came out really recently in March in the Journal of Sustainable Tourism, which maybe you guys all get to your mailbox, I don't know. And so they found kind of what I've already talked about. Kayaking is one of the fastest growing U.S. nature-based outdoor activities. 12.5 million participants, representing a 63% increase from 2000 to 2007. So this is a booming sport. People are excited about going out and kayaking. And the other thing they found is increase in paddle sport participation has led to the growing demand for paddle trail development in rural areas. So that's what we're doing, right? That's what we're trying to do. And this, we know that there's people kayaking, and so we want to give them access to that and being able to come to our communities. And they also found kind of what that Outdoor Industry Association report found was that there is money coming directly, indirectly, and induced economic impact from these paddle-based recreation. And so they found, looking at just specifically paddle-based, not outdoor recreation overall, is that $36 billion came in directly or indirectly and employed over 308,000 people per year. So it's bringing jobs too. And so what they found that I think is really interesting and might be interesting to you guys when you're thinking about kind of innovative ways of funding your paddle trail and as a state, right, is how can we kind of keep maintaining our water trails and funding them. And so this is kind of what they looked at. This is a study done in North Carolina, and what they did is they looked at willingness to pay. And so if you don't know what willingness to pay is, it's basically like a survey of asking whether or not you would pay for something. And so it's hypothetical, but these willingness to pay studies have been found to be pretty accurate. Because if you're going to fill out a study, you're probably going to fill it out truthfully. And so these are all based on getting a study back. And so what they found is that these different groups had a willingness to pay for either a user fee, equipment tax, craft registration, or license. And so these are all things people, I know when I was working at Georgia Network, have kind of thought about and other states have done, is that you have to license your kayak or you have to pay a user fee to go use the water trail, whatever it is. And so, or you have an equipment tax on buying a kayak, and that then goes towards water trails. And so this is kind of an innovative way of thinking about, helping pay for water trails. So interesting study. So another sort of hurdle that you might have to come over is communities often think, well, human-powered recreation doesn't bring money to communities, right? The granola myth is that hikers and paddlers bring their water bottle and their granola bar and they don't spend any money in the town, right? And that's a hurdle that is a real hurdle. But we have the numbers showing that that is not true. Hikers, paddlers are spending money on in the communities, on food, on lodging. They're not just bringing their water bottle and granola bar. And so that's what I'm hoping, these studies, you can go back to your communities and use this numbers. But there are drawbacks, and I'm sure people will talk about these drawbacks, and I'm going to kind of go through this kind of quickly. But I just wanted to go through a couple examples where there are actual numbers where people have spent money in these communities. They're not just bringing a water bottle in their granola bars. And so the North Fork Canoe Trail is kind of the most well-known water trail in the States and Canada. It goes a little bit into Canada. It's 740 miles, so it's really long. But they had a graduate student do an economic impact study in 6 regions. And what they found was paddlers infused these local communities with $12 million, jobs, and the difference between local paddlers and non-local paddlers. Obviously they spend different amounts of money. You don't have to spend lodging, you maybe can bring your own food, whatever. So non-local paddlers are spending more money, so if you can bring people to your communities, you're going to get people spending more money. 12% of the paddlers used a guide service, so they were supporting a local guide service. They found this trail benefited existing businesses rather than creating new markets. They were benefiting businesses that were already there. And so that's kind of an interesting thing we found. So what we can learn is that the length of river, obviously a longer river is going to draw more non-local paddlers, but local paddlers are spending more money too, and short rivers can draw paddlers, and local paddlers are spending money. Economic benefits can be seen quickly in these communities because there's really not a whole lot of money you have to put in, because your infrastructure is already there, your water trail is there, you just have to add signs and access versus trying to build a whole nother sort of trail or whatever. And so what they also found was you can attract more users by promoting a designated water trail with signs, websites, and maps. And so that's something I'm sure Gwyneth will talk about and people will show you today, is that if you can get people to learn about your trail, they're going to come to your trail, right? And so that's why these things are important. A local study, the Chattooga in Georgia, found that voters spent an average of $255 per trip. And so this is a place where they're spending money on going whitewater rafting, right? And so that's potentially a lot different than some other places. But that is, this is in Georgia. People are spending money in Georgia to get on the river. And so day trips versus overnight trips. And so this is something that's harder, obviously, in the east. We have shorter stretches of river, but if you can have an overnight stretch or you can have access to camping. I know I was talking to Deborah, is that right? Deborah about, are there camping spots along the Chattahoochee? So overnight trips, people are spending more money than day trips. The math is pretty easy, but the studies have been done, so you can point to these numbers when people are maybe fighting you to have camping spots. And so I just want to talk about a couple examples of some communities that have done some kind of interesting, unique sort of ways to bring economic development to their community. So the Waccamaw is where our staff member works in South Carolina. And so it's a really cool water trail in Conway, South Carolina, and has a lot of protected land around it. And so there are some camping spots. But it also goes through an urban area, Conway, South Carolina. And it's really interesting area that what they've done is they have created this program, and it's just being developed right now, but it's the Waccamaw Blue Card, where people can go to the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and print out this card, and then go to businesses along the river, and those businesses will give them a discount, either like a free appetizer at a restaurant or 10% off a rental property at the beach or whatever it is. And so there's sort of the benefit for it doesn't cost any money to print the card off, and it's just sort of a participation. The businesses are participating, and they show what businesses are participating. And so what the businesses get out of it is they basically are reaching a clientele that they wouldn't be reaching otherwise. And so it's kind of a win-win benefit, and it's sort of getting people excited, businesses excited about the river, and having people visit their businesses, and paddlers getting excited about getting deals, right? So it's kind of an interesting concept. It's just being put in place now, so stay tuned for details. And so we know that these types of businesses are the ones that are benefiting from water trails. So outfitters, guides, anglers, retailers, restaurants, and lodging. And so those are kind of the people that they are targeting for that. American Rivers also does dam removal. And so one example in North Carolina is this community near Hitchcock Creek has removed this dam in order to, this sort of unsafe old dam, to highlight their river as a water trail. And so they have basically put in money to these communities, to their waterway, to help highlight it, so they know they're going to get that economic return. They're willing to spend money on removing a dam, which is not cheap, to have, you know, their waterway navigable. So, sort of another example. So, last couple things. One thing that American Rivers, National Park Service, and National Geographic just came out with is river stories. And so these are just a couple of examples I want to talk about how to get your water trail out there. So this is a web-based, basically, tour of a few water trails. And so they're hoping to get lots more, but they have a few that they've launched with. One being the Waccamaw, which I talked about in South Carolina, and then another one being the Etowah River. So if you haven't been and looked at our very own Etowah River, it features Joe Cook and Matt are even in the video as well, or you Matt. So really cool, basically, way of giving people a virtual tour that are just giving people access to your river that wouldn't have access to it potentially, and maybe are excited to come and go paddling. And so Gwyneth already mentioned this, but so the Great Outdoors Initiative basically helped develop the National Water Trails program, and we have one in our very own state. And so just these different ways they're coming to highlight our water trails. And so one thing that's really important is that, you know, you develop your maps, you develop your website, and have the clearinghouse as a way to get this information out. And so I'd encourage you to do that. And so just a few take-home points. I won't read through them, but so we know that river recreation brings money to communities, and would encourage you also, I didn't know that this study existed, but I guess Deborah has recently had a study done on the Chattahoochee on the economic impact that it would have as a water trail, and so maybe you can share that with Gwyneth as well, or maybe it's already out there. But so I have a couple studies, and I'm sure this PowerPoint will go up there, and so the link to the Outdoor Industry Association reports, and there's tons of economic impact reports on their website. This is a tourism study done by North Carolina, and I'll give the other citations for the other studies that I mentioned. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is just that we have this version 2.0 coming out in the next couple months of our Blue Trails Guide on American Rivers, and it has lots of information, kind of not Georgia-specific like the Clearinghouse has, but sort of more theoretical of how to develop a blue trail. So would encourage you to, and has, Hitchcock Creek that I mentioned, Waccamaw will be on there. Lots of case studies if you want to bring to your communities and saying, these other communities are doing this and they are seeing their economic return. So would encourage you to take a look at that. So I probably don't have time for questions, but thank you.